within the last 36 hours, I learned kind of a new little fact. So the grossly oversimplified answer, so that we don't get way too pedantic, is GABA, right? Gamma-aminobutyric acid, right? GABA is the brake pedal, right? If anything, I mean, it's a little bit more complicated than that, but GABA is what turns things down. Alcohol basically kind of does a lot of what GABA does. Benzodiazepines, Valium, Ativan, Xanax, they do a lot of what GABA does. So that tends to turn things down. And then glutamate is the gas pedal, right? So those are now all the cool kids in psychiatry are kind of putting those two things together, that GABA's like this and glutamate's like that. Where it comes in for me is that glutamate also has a lot to do with neuroplasticity. Right, so it's the arousal, but it's also the learning and the potentiation, and we can get neurogenesis and neuroplasticity out of this. Now, Dr. Eads' point was that the hyperinsulinemia, the inflammation, and it's really kind of overstimulating glutamate, and the GABA is being left behind. And the concern, and I absolutely, completely believe that we're seeing this in real life, it's putting the brain in kind of a constant arousal, constant anxiety, fight or flight, all those things. And I think it is kind of a good characterization of the fact that I don't think I know a single 24-year-old who doesn't seem to have anxiety. I mean, they talk about it. All the young people that work around me right now, if anyone talks about not having anxiety, they seem to feel that's odd.
They're the outlier.
They find that interesting. Like, what do you mean no anxiety? For them, it's just, do I have a little anxiety or a lot of anxiety? But the reason why I found this information so upsetting is that S-ketamine that I've taken on, as the kind of FDA-approved version of ketamine treatment for depression, well, the whole mechanism of action of that drug hypothetically is predicated on disinhibition of glutamate. It's neuroplasticity. So the idea is that you block that NMDA, N-methyl D-aspartate receptor, which disinhibits glutamate action, which brings about all of this kind of wonderful arousal and neuroplasticity, and yada 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 yada, depression gone. And it works well, and it's great. But suddenly I'm thinking, like, if I have a person with metabolic syndrome and hyperinsulinemia and the depression and the anxiety that is starting to look inevitable to me if they have metabolic syndrome and hyperinsulinemia, and then I give them S-ketamine, am I just throwing gas on a fire? if they're already hyperglutamatergic because of all of this inflammation and hyperinsulinemia.
And that could be it could be S-ketamine could be a misdiagnosis because you're missing that, and all of a sudden you have this push on the glutamine, and then when the crash comes, it could be devastating.
Well, that, or I'm even wondering, clinically speaking, that this is the upsetting part, is I'm trying to think about how I'm going to do this in my practice. But clinically speaking, it might actually become mandatory to solve metabolic syndrome before we could start S-ketamine. And maybe try to explain that to my patient that way, right? Like right now the house is on fire and S-ketamine is the gas. Now we put out the fire and we only have a fire in the fireplace. Gas is a real good idea, but I got to get the house fire out first. And then what's interesting is whether or not I'll be able to make a depressed and anxious person understand that, because that's its own challenge, to try to have that conversation with someone who's in a lot of distress.